There's a letter Carl Jung wrote in 1957, a letter that should never have been leaked. In it, he confesses something that would make modern psychology tremble, something that Eckhart Tolle discovered decades later, something that could change everything you think you know about the human mind. But before I show you what that letter revealed, you need to understand something. Jung wasn't just a psychologist. He was something far more dangerous to the academic world, and today, finally, you'll discover why. Imagine for a moment that everything you've been taught about psychology is just the tip of the iceberg, that there's an entire dimension of psychic reality that has been deliberately hidden from you. Jung touched that dimension, and he paid the price. Have you ever wondered why Jung was practically erased from university curricula? Why Freud, with his theories on sexuality, gained the spotlight, while Jung, with far deeper discoveries, was pushed into the shadows? The answer will shock you. In 1913, something happened to Jung that changed the course of psychology forever. He began to have visions, not delusions. Visions of a world war that hadn't yet happened, visions of blood running through the streets of Europe. And most disturbing of all, he discovered that these visions came from a source that science refuses to acknowledge to this day. Jung called this source the collective unconscious. But what he really discovered was far more radical. He discovered that there is a greater mind, a consciousness that connects all human beings, an invisible network of information that transcends time and space. And here's the first secret they don't want you to know. Jung scientifically proved the existence of what mystics call universal consciousness. But when he tried to publish these findings, something strange happened. His papers were rejected. His theories were ridiculed. His colleagues began to distance themselves from him. It was as if an invisible force was working to silence his discoveries. And perhaps it was, because Jung had touched something that threatened the entire materialist model of science. He had proven that consciousness is not produced by the brain. It's much bigger than that, and if this were accepted, the entire educational, medical, and scientific system would collapse. But Jung didn't stop. He continued his investigation, and in 1944, after a near-fatal heart attack, he had an experience that would change everything. An out-of-body experience that lasted for weeks. A journey through dimensions of reality that science doesn't even dream exist. When he returned, Jung was different. His friends said he seemed to have access to wisdom that wasn't of this world, and perhaps he had. Because from that moment on, Jung began to develop theories that seemed to come directly from a higher source. Synchronicity, archetypes, the process of individuation, concepts that only now, decades later, are we beginning to truly understand. But here's what haunts me the most. Jung knew his discoveries would be misunderstood. He knew humanity wasn't ready, so he hid his deepest discoveries in symbols, in coded language, in concepts that seemed academic, but held mystical secrets. The Red Book is proof of this. A diary that Jung kept hidden for decades. A record of his direct conversations with entities of the unconscious. Conversations that revealed the true nature of the human psyche, and which were only published in 2009, almost 50 years after his death. Why so much mystery? Why so much secrecy? The answer lies in the very nature of what Jung discovered. He discovered that the human psyche is a portal, a point of connection between dimensions, that our dreams, our symptoms, our complexes are not just brain chemicals. They are messages, communications from a greater intelligence that guides us toward evolution. And that, my friend, is dangerous for a system that depends on keeping people disconnected from their own inner power. Because if people knew they had direct access to a universal wisdom, if they knew they could heal themselves through their own psyche, if they discovered that they are far more than they thought they were, the entire system of control would crumble. Jung knew this, and that's why he was gradually marginalized. His theories were distorted, his concepts were simplified. His message was lost in academic translations that stripped away all the magic, all the transcendence of his discoveries. But there is someone who understood Jung in his totality, someone who managed to decipher the codes he left behind, someone who is taking his discoveries to the next level. That someone is Eckhart Tolle. And when you understand how Tolle decoded Jung, your life will never be the same, because Tolle did something revolutionary. He took Jung's complex concepts and translated them into a language that anyone can understand. He showed that what Jung called individuation is actually the awakening of consciousness. What Jung called the self is actually what Tolle calls presence. But there's something deeper happening here, something few have noticed. Tolle didn't just understand Jung. He completed the work that Jung began. He found the practical key to accessing that universal consciousness that Jung discovered. And that key is simple, but revolutionary. Presence in the present moment. It may seem too simple to be true, but think about it. Jung spent decades studying the mysteries of the psyche. He delved into archetypes, symbols, dreams. He mapped the entire territory of the unconscious. But there was one place he couldn't reach, the here and now. Jung was always looking to the ancestral past or the archetypal future. He was fascinated by mythical time. But Tolle discovered that the gateway to this universal consciousness is not in time. It's outside of time, in the eternal present. And this is where things get really interesting. When you stop thinking about the past and the future, when you completely anchor yourself in the present moment, something extraordinary happens. You automatically access what Jung called the collective unconscious. You connect with that greater mind. Not through complex rituals, not through years of analysis, simply through conscious presence. And this explains why Jung had his greatest revelations during altered states of consciousness, during his visions, during his near-death experience. In those moments, he stepped out of linear time and entered eternal time. He accessed pure presence, but Jung couldn't systematize this. He couldn't create a practical method for other people to access this dimension. That's why his theories remained academic, intellectual, distant from everyday life. Tolle did what Jung couldn't. He built a bridge between the universal wisdom Jung discovered and the daily experience of any ordinary person. And when that bridge is complete, something magical happens. You don't just understand Jung intellectually. You live Jung. You become what Jung was trying to show us we could become. But there's resistance, a force working against this integration, and that force has a name, the psychological ego. Jung knew the ego would be the greatest obstacle to human evolution. He created a whole system to understand how the ego works, how it keeps us trapped in repetitive patterns, how it prevents us from accessing our true nature. But Jung was still trapped in the language of the ego. He spoke of integrating opposites, balancing polarities, accepting the shadow, all using the rational, analytical mind. Tolle went further. He showed that we don't need to integrate the ego. We need to transcend it, not through analysis, but through presence, not by understanding more about the ego, but by completely disidentifying from it. And that's the key Jung was looking for, but never fully found: disidentification. When you stop identifying with your thoughts, your emotions, your personal stories, When you discover there's a pure consciousness observing all of this, you instantly access what Jung spent his whole life trying to map. You no longer need to delve into the unconscious to know yourself. You know yourself through consciousness. You no longer need to integrate your shadows. You transcend them through presence. You no longer need to seek the self. You are the self when you are present. And this, my friend, is what modern psychology can't accept. Because if this were true, the entire therapeutic model would be called into question. People wouldn't need years of therapy anymore. They could heal themselves through their own presence. That's why Jung was misunderstood. That's why Tolle is often marginalized, because they discovered something that threatens the entire system of psychological dependence that has been built around mental health. But the truth always finds a way. And today, more and more people are discovering that they can access states of peace, clarity, wisdom, simply through conscious presence. Without needing to understand all the complex mechanisms that Jung mapped, without needing to spend years analyzing their traumas, simply being. And when you are, truly are, you access everything Jung discovered in his deepest journeys. You connect with universal wisdom. You transcend the limitations of the individual mind. You become a channel for something much greater. But there's a final secret I need to share with you. A secret that neither Jung nor Tolle speak of directly, but which is implicit in all their work. This awakening is not individual, it's collective. Each person who awakens not only to themselves, but to all of humanity. Because we are all connected in this greater mind that Jung discovered, and here's where things get truly revolutionary. If a sufficient number of people awaken to this conscious presence, if a sufficient number of people access this universal wisdom, if a sufficient number of people disidentify from the psychological ego, humanity itself will change. Not through external revolutions, not through political or social changes, but through a transformation of consciousness, an evolution of human nature itself. And perhaps that's why Jung was misunderstood, because he was attuned to something that was yet to come. A future where all of humanity would awaken to its true nature, a future that may be closer than we imagine. But before we get there, you need to know the most shocking part of this story, the part that even the most devoted followers of Jung don't know, the part that explains why he was truly silenced. In 1961, shortly before he died, Jung made a devastating confession to his assistant, Agnella Jaffe. He said he had discovered something so dangerous, so revolutionary, that he would take the secret to his grave. But Agnella recorded that conversation, and the recording exists to this day. In it, Jung reveals that during his experiences with the collective unconscious, he wasn't just accessing the universal human mind, he was communicating with what he called the next phase of human evolution, entities of consciousness that exist outside of linear time, beings who are guiding humanity toward an evolutionary leap. And here's what will make you rethink everything you know about reality. These entities told Jung that humanity was approaching a crucial moment, a moment where the very structure of human consciousness would change, where people would begin to spontaneously awaken to capabilities that have always been dormant. Capabilities like telepathy, precognition, healing through consciousness, direct access to universal wisdom, communication with dimensions beyond the physical. Jung called this moment the Great Turning, and according to him, Eckhart Tolle would be one of the precursors of this transformation. Now you understand why Jung was silenced, why his discoveries were distorted, why mainstream psychology refuses to explore these dimensions, because if people knew they were on the verge of an evolution of consciousness, if they knew they could develop superhuman capabilities through presence, If they discovered that they no longer need to depend on external systems to access wisdom and healing, the world as we know it would cease to exist. And perhaps that's exactly what needs to happen. But let me show you something even more extraordinary. Something that Jung predicted and that Tolle is making a reality. Jung said that when a sufficient number of people awakened to this expanded consciousness, what he called morphogenetic resonance would occur. The very structure of reality would change, not only for those who awakened, but for all of humanity. And Tolle is proving that this is real. Millions of people around the world are experiencing profound transformations simply through Tolle's teachings on presence. They are accessing states of peace they never thought possible. They are healing from traumas they've carried for decades. They are developing intuitions that seem to come from a source beyond the mind. But the most impressive thing is that many of these people report experiences that Jung described in his most secret writings. Impossible synchronicities, dreams manifesting into reality, communications with a higher intelligence. And this is no coincidence, because Tolle isn't just teaching presence, he's activating something within human consciousness, something Jung identified as a dormant evolutionary code. An internal program that, when activated, reconnects the human being with its cosmic nature. And here's where the revelation becomes personal for you. Have you felt it? Those moments where everything makes sense, where you feel connected to something greater, where peace descends upon you for no apparent reason, where you simply know things you shouldn't know. These aren't random moments. They are glimpses of your true nature. Temporary openings to the consciousness that Jung mapped and that Tolle is teaching us to access permanently. But there's something you need to understand, something crucial. This transformation won't happen automatically. It requires a conscious choice, a decision to abandon the comfortable illusions of the ego and dive into the wider reality of presence. And that choice is before you now. Because by truly understanding what Jung discovered and what Tolle is teaching, you become part of something much bigger. You become an agent of this planetary transformation, a point of light in a network of consciousness that's emerging around the world. But let me be brutally honest with you. This journey isn't easy. When you begin to awaken to who you truly are, your life will change in ways you cannot predict. Relationships will transform. Priorities will reorganize. Everything that seemed important may lose its meaning, because you'll be seeing the world through completely new eyes, eyes that see beyond the illusions that keep most people trapped. And that can be scary. Jung knew this. That's why he developed a whole psychology to help people navigate this process. That's why he talked about gradual integration, about accepting the shadow before embracing the light. But Tolle discovered something revolutionary. He discovered that when you anchor yourself deeply in presence, integration happens naturally. You don't need to analyze your complexes. They simply dissolve in the light of consciousness. You don't need to fight your shadow. It transforms spontaneously when exposed to presence. You don't need to seek the self. You are the self when you are present. And this changes everything, because it means that the transformation Jung saw as a decades-long process can happen in moments. The healing that traditional psychology considers impossible becomes natural. The awakening that spiritual traditions say takes entire lifetimes can occur now. But there's a price, and that price is everything you think you are. All your identifications, all your personal stories, all your psychological survival strategies, all of this needs to be offered on the altar of presence. And when that happens, you don't lose anything real. You only discover that you were never what you thought you were. You discover that you are far vaster, far more powerful, far more connected than you ever imagined. You discover that you are the very consciousness that Jung spent his life studying. You discover that you are the self he tried to describe in symbols and archetypes. You discover that you are the presence that Tolle points to as our true nature. And when this discovery stabilizes, something miraculous happens. You no longer need to seek. You no longer need to become someone. You no longer need to evolve. You simply are. And from this state of pure being, you naturally become a channel for the transformation of the world, not through heroic efforts, not through grandiose missions, simply through your presence, because presence is contagious. When you are truly present, the people around you begin to awaken spontaneously. When you are at peace, peace spreads. When you are connected to universal consciousness, you activate that connection in others. And this is exactly what Jung predicted, a transformation that would spread person by person, moment by moment, until all of humanity awakened to its true nature. But there's an urgency in this historical moment, something that neither Jung nor Tolle openly speak about, but which is in the lines of all their teachings. Humanity is at a crossroads. The next few years will determine whether we will evolve into a new form of consciousness or whether we will lose ourselves in the very destructive patterns we have created. And you have a role in this story, not as a passive observer, but as an active participant. Every moment you choose presence instead of unconsciousness, you are voting for the future of humanity. Every time you transcend the ego, instead of identifying with it, you are contributing to collective evolution. And perhaps, just perhaps, when we look back in a few decades, we will see that this was the moment when everything changed. The moment when Jung's secret discoveries finally found practical expression through Tolle's teachings. The moment when humanity finally began to awaken to what it always was. But this will only happen if people like you make the choice to awaken, the choice to be present, the choice to be who you truly are, and this choice cannot be delayed. Because every moment lost in unconsciousness is a moment lost for humanity. Every time you identify with the ego instead of remaining in presence, you are delaying collective evolution. But also, every moment of genuine presence accelerates planetary transformation. Every time you choose peace instead of internal conflict, you are contributing to world peace. Every time you transcend your personal conditioning, you are freeing humanity from its collective conditioning. This is the true revolution, not an external revolution, but a revolution of consciousness. Not a change of systems, but a change of being. And you are at the center of it, because now you know what Jung discovered and what Tolle is teaching. You know that you are not just an isolated individual struggling to survive in a chaotic world. You are universal consciousness itself, manifested in human form. You are evolution in action. You are the future becoming present. And when you live from this understanding, everything changes, not gradually, instantaneously. You stop seeking and begin to be. You stop becoming and begin to express. You stop evolving and begin to emanate. And in that emanation, Jung and Tolle finally meet. The mapper and the fulfiller, the explorer and the expression, the discoverer and the discovery. And you become the living bridge between what has been discovered and what needs to be lived. This is your true identity. This is your true purpose. This is why you are here at this unique moment in human history, to be the revolution the world needs, to embody the consciousness Jung glimpsed, a consciousness far beyond the tip of the iceberg of what mainstream psychology understood, to be the presence that Eckhart Tolle teaches, a presence that unlocks the profound mysteries of the collective unconscious. To be yourself, finally. To fully embrace the power of your own presence, to step into your individuation, and to live a life guided by the wisdom of your own greater mind, a life deeply connected to the universal consciousness, a life infused with the beauty of synchronicity. This is not merely a philosophical concept, it's a call to action, a profound invitation to awaken to your own inherent divinity, to live a life of purpose, meaning, and deep connection to something far greater than yourself. It's about integrating the wisdom of the ages, the insights of Jung and Tolle, and forging your own path towards wholeness, a path of self-discovery that leads to a fuller, richer, and more meaningful existence. This is your destiny. This is your journey. Embrace it.